All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything Cultural Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we know a 2023 preview and prediction for the Missouri Tigers. Looking at this coaching staff, Eli Drinkwitz enters his fourth season, 17-19 record thus far. Kirby Moore, first year with the program, he's the offensive coordinator. Spent the past 6 seasons with Fresno State. Blake Baker, second year in the role as defensive coordinator. And it feels like the Tigers have quietly built a stout roster. Expectations of competing are now on the table, it seems, especially with how they're able to hold up against Georgia last year at home. Looking at this offense, though, Nick, we're going to have to see immense improvements. Kirby Moore, of course, comes over after working with Jay Kaner the past couple of seasons. And this talent he has to work with is pretty interesting. You look at who they have a quarterback in Brady Cook, a guy who seems poised. He's a good threat as a runner, really smooth athlete with good mobility. Shows some solid flick to the boundary. Certainly not going to be an NFL prospect type player by any means, but if he can start to step up and raise his ceiling a good bit, I think this offense can go to different levels. 6'2", 205 from Cook. Looking at the backfield, though, it's going to be a committee approach, it seems, once again. Walking Cody Schrader, we talked about him a season ago after he came over from Truman State, where he put up absurd production. He showcased good speed as a slashing runner. Nathaniel Peete comes over from Stanford. He also has some standout speed. I think Missouri's happy to have this duo back. They need to be more effective, though. Only 200-plus yard games, Nick, and I think that's where it's going to start. Of course, we'll talk about the offensive line in a second. But in terms of on paper, when you look at who they have coming back, they have, the production's not all that crazy. The numbers on screen are not very fantastic. But when you look who they have at quarterback and running back to get things started, I'm very happy with what they have, and I think Missouri is as well.
It's decent returning production, certainly, to have. Brady Cook is not going to blow you away at quarterback, but he's a steady guy that's going to be able to produce for you. 64.8% completion percentage, 2,739 yards passing for him, 14 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. I think those are good numbers considering the competition they play in the SEC. I think Brady Cook is a stable, solid quarterback for sure. Cody Schrader had a decent season, all things considered. I think he certainly would like to see the numbers get higher, but 45 yards on the ground, 4.4 yards per carry, and 9 scores for him are not bad numbers. He also had 137 receiving yards. Can be a bit of a threat in the backfield in terms of receiving as well. Nathaniel Peete, a good player to have with 438 yards on the ground, 4.4 yards per carry, and 2 scores for him as well. So overall, I think this is a good start to this offense. There is some nice production here, and all these guys are experienced returners who can find their way to get involved in the game.
Look at this receiving core. This is considered one of the more underrated ones in the conference. They do lose Dominic Lovett, which is just a terrible blow that you lose your best player to an SEC East rival. Luther Burden, though, ex-5-star, they're able to keep him in state away from the Bulldogs, who are really pressing down hard. A dangerous yak player. Plenty of snaps out wide this year. Might be using the slot a little bit more following Lovett's departure. 8.3 yards per carry, though, Nick. That needs to at least double. It needs to see that be up to about 16 or more for this offense to really start to take shape. With that departure, Dominic Lovett, though, Theo Weiss comes in from Oklahoma, brings size, 6'3", 205, and some experience from the Sooners. Mookie Cooper has seen significant playing time the past 2 seasons, added some speed. Dennis Jackson from Ole Miss, he's about 170 pounds. Mekhi Miller, a young big playmaker the staff seems to be very high on. This is a quite sound group for Missouri. No real worries here at wide receiver, but I do want to see this offense as a whole start to gel together a little bit more, because there's a lot of big plays that are certainly being left on the table. They have the talent to get it done. Brady Cook has to step up along to do these wide receivers. But I think the ceiling's pretty high for this passing game overall if they can find some type of rhythm.
Certainly disappointing to lose a guy like Dominic Lovett, who is really talented, just a great weapon that they had. They lost him to Georgia. Really tough loss, but obviously when the Bulldogs come calling, it's tough to say no to that. Luther Burden, a former 5-star, one of the highest recruits in Missouri history. Eli Drinkwitz has slowly been putting together a program, hitting the recruiting trail hard, keeping guys in the state of Missouri, and really landing some great talent. I think it's really important for a guy like Drinkwitz to bring in that talent and keep the talent around. We talked at length last year in the preseason whether or not Burden would transfer at the end of the season, what type of impact that could have with NIL and things of that nature. But Burden sticks around, and man, that is a great weapon to have in your arsenal. He's a fantastic wide receiver, fantastic speed, yards after the catch, just an incredible weapon overall. The numbers last year weren't phenomenal, right? 375 yards receiving, 8.3 yards per catch, and 6 scores. But I think Burden being that number one this year is going to get unleashed and have a huge breakout season. I'm pinning him to be my biggest breakout player in terms of wide receivers in the SEC. I love Luther Burden a lot here. Mookie Cooper as well is a very good player with 297 yards receiving, 11.9 yards per catch this past season, and they made some work in the portal and brought in some pieces in Theo Weiss and Dennis Jackson, who are coming from 2 talented programs, and both are solid playmakers. This is a very underrated unit that has a lot of good potential here that could certainly break out this year.
The Tigers returned 6 starters. They lose 3 of their top 5 pass catchers. Lost 9 guys in the portal, and they added 4. 2 of them coming on the offensive line. This was a unit that was not good last year. 125th nationally tackles for loss allowed, 65th in sacks. Brady Cook's elusiveness certainly helped that number from being a lot worse. But I think there's a lot of hope for this offensive line. You return tackle Javon Foster, great strength, anchors down with power, also creates some displacement in the run game, great length at 6'5", 320. He's certainly going to push for an all-conference honors this year. The rest of this unit, Armand Mebo was a stout pass blocker, right tackle, had nearly 400 snaps. He figures a slot in at right guard to accommodate the arriving Marcellus Johnson from Eastern Michigan. He has 2,200 career snaps at left tackle, stands at 6'4", 308. Cameron Johnson, he was a standout left guard for Houston last year and the Cougars. He's a similar size, 6'4", 305. Veteran Xavier Delgado still there to compete at left guard. Looks as if Johnson will be the center. EJ Ogor Odama also looking for a spot in the interior starting lineup. The offensive line needs to be much better, and I think they should see some improvements this fall. Love the additions here. Obviously, a boosting competition for the arriving Johnson. Well, the two arriving Johnsons, really. No relation there. But I think they have the size, and I think they certainly have some nice talent here. I expect this offensive line to boost tremendously, which I think will certainly help this running game out, passing game as well. If this offensive line can be at least 30% better, Nick, there's a lot of expectations this offense can carry with.
Very weak offensive line this past season. They made a lot of work in the portal, and it certainly is a huge step forward. Like you said, if they can find a way to get this offensive line in a good position and step up even 30, 40%, they could be a really dominant offense. They could put up a ton of points. I think they made some good works. Bringing in the two Johnsons at center and right tackle, very talented players. Javon Foster at left tackle, I think he's a really solid piece to have. I like the size with him at 6'3", at 6'5", 320 overall. Very good size on him. I think this unit, it's the biggest question mark on this offense. Can this unit improve? If they do, I think they can certainly be a better offensive unit. 24.8 points per game is a number you need to see get higher. If they have an improvement on offensive line and Brady Cook can find a way to get the ball better to Luther Burden and step up his yards per catch, this offense could easily score 30 points per game this year.
I think 35 per game potentially might be on the table if this O-line really steps up. The fate of this offense, though, is really in the hands of that unit up front. I'm going to go with a B here, though, Nick, because I want to be cautious. I'm pretty excited for what they can do. But at the same time, these players aren't exactly elite, even though this is a nice supporting cast. Burden, maybe with his talent and upside, he could be an elite player coming off this season. These are, a solid supporting cast. But if this team really wants to compete, these guys all have to play at a higher level. I think the potential is there, but I'm not going to jump the gun too early.
I think B minus is kind of right where this offense is. It's a good unit. Luther Burden adds that complete X factor as a former 5-star recruit. Brady Cook, a servable SEC quarterback. Good 1-2 punch there with Schrader and Pete in the running back room. Mookie Cooper's a nice supporting wide receiver as well. As long as this offensive line can step up and find a way to be comfortable and pass block as well as running block, this offense can certainly step off and hit the ground running.
Now looking at the defense, the biggest reason I'm probably hopeful for the offensive line is because what they were able to do last year in the trenches on this side of the ball. Run defense went from 124th to 32nd this past season. Guys like DJ Coleman, Elijah McGuire are gone. This defensive line still has some good talent. Darius Robinson was a good defensive end for the Tigers. It was an exceptional run defender. It was impressive as a pass rusher also. Has some real big shoes to fill, though, but he seems primed for that role. Picked up Joe Moore from Arizona State, an experienced player. Ben Strotman from Missouri SAT. Niles Gaddy, he was a really good player for Jackson State. So they added 4 players in the portal, 3 guys right there that help boost this pass rushing department. Clearly, they're not all thrilled with the depth at the defensive end position, though, Nick. That's kind of the message I'm being told with how many guys they picked up in the portal. Looking on the interior, though, Christian Williams, 6'2", 314. He was a really good run defender. He's going to line up next to Jaden Garrigan, who struggled for most part of last season. Relius George, he was also a really good run stopper. Josh Landry, he had plenty of playing time last season. Overall, pretty experienced defensive line, some good depth, especially on the interior, and the portal adds a little bit concerning on paper, but what are your thoughts on this pass rush? It's certainly not going to be as good as it was last year, but if they can hold up their end when it comes to defending the run, that's going to be the biggest, most important thing here in this conference.
Certainly can expect a regression as a defensive line unit, but this is a decent unit on paper overall. Darius Robinson at 35 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks for him. Christian Williams, I like what I saw to him. 27 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. Relius George Jr., 25 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a sack. Not a bad piece to have. Jaden Garrigan and Josh Landry, they were kind of sitting there at the bottom there with 14 total tackles for Garrigan and 12 for Landry, and they each had a couple sacks and a tackle for loss between them. This is a decent unit. I think it's set for a regression. Certainly, they made a lot of work in the portal, like you said, bringing in guys like Austin Firezone, Ben Stratman, and others. But I think overall, this unit, they definitely will see a drop off compared to what they were able to get in the sacks department. But I think the run defense, it will be kind of in that 130 yards per game range. I think around that sort of 120 to 130 range again, which is really a respectable number for this Tigers defense.
Now, looking at the middle of this 4-2-5, Tyron Hopper, thinner framed, violent hitter at 6'2", 221, agile athlete who's got great change of direction. He's a fast-flowing backer who really improved as a pass rusher this past season. Next to him is Chad Bailey, who was immensely impactful for them. He was probably their best player last season, had a lot of production. He was suspended earlier in the offseason for a DWI, so that's something to monitor. He was an elite performer for them, though. Impressed in coverage, was good against the run as well. In terms of depth, they added a 215-pounder and Tristan Newsome from the JUCO ranks. Damian Wilson saw around 150 snaps. Wasn't all that great for them. Missouri's set in the middle, Nick. If, health starts to become an issue or they start getting grinded down on, then the linebacking core will certainly be something to watch. But in terms of who they have as the two starters, if Bailey's on the field with no further discipline, I'm not all that worried. But if it does come to some of those outlying factors, this is certainly going to be an issue.
Tyron Hopper is a fantastic player, hard hitter, 77 total tackles for him. A really talented piece to return. Second top returning tackler with him, 77 total tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 4 pass breakups. A do-it-all linebacker, very talented piece to have. Damian Wilson as well, underrated piece. He got limited appearance. He had 16 total tackles. He's your number 3 linebacker. There's your backup. I like him as a backup piece, good rotational piece. Chad Bailey, if he is able to play the whole season, has no off-the-field issues. We haven't quite fully figured out if he's going to be suspended or not. And if he is playing fully this season, 57 total tackles for him this past season, 8.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 3 pass breakups. Very good numbers out of the linebacker. That 1-2 punch there is fantastic.
Now, looking at the most exciting part of this defense, probably the secondary. You start cornerback Chris Abrams-Drini. He's competitive in coverage. He's very aggressive when coming downhill. Great ball skills. He was great in the slot 2 years ago. Didn't have the smoothest transition outside corner this season, but he did have those 14 pass breakups. Expect him to be great this year. He's always been an elite tackler also. Enos Rackstraw on the other side was really good for them at corner. They have a nice duo here, probably one of the best in the conference. Dalen Carnell, he was great for them in the slot. So they really have found everyone's calling, it seems, at these cornerback positions. Travis Johnson spent the past 3 seasons in the slot for the Gators. Wasn't all that great, but does have good experience in the conference. So that's certainly something to monitor. Drayden Norwood saw 300-plus snaps last fall. It wasn't all that great himself. That experience is certainly noted. There's plenty of it here at the cornerback position. Even better at the safety group, that features Joseph Charleston. He was a standout run defender, great tackler. Jaden Carlisle was a tad better in coverage, but just like the entire DB group, these guys are all effective, surefire tacklers, a well-coached unit with great experience and good talent. Very excited for what this back end can do, Nick. This cornerback duo really gets things started, and then you have experience at safety and a lot of production from those positions also. What are your thoughts on this back end as one of the better DB units in the SEC?
Very underrated unit in the SEC. A lot of production here, a lot of talent overall, some really good numbers here. I'm highlighting 6 different guys that have some meaningful numbers. Jalen Charles as well, leading the team in total tackles, returning 81 total tackles for him, 4 tackles for loss, and a sack. 3 receptions and 4 pass breakups. Really good numbers from him. Joseph Charleston, I like the numbers out of him. 53 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, plus a sack for him. 2 pass breakups for him. Chris Abrams-Durain, good player as well, 48 total tackles, 14 pass breakups. Ernest Rackstraw Jr., 35 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, plus 12 pass breakups for him. Dylan Carnell, underrated, didn't get a whole lot of snaps, but he had a good numbers in limited appearances, 29 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 3 picks for him. And Drayden Norwood, limited appearances as well, but he had 14 total tackles and 4 pass breakups plus a pick. This is a very deep unit. All these guys have production. They return a lot of experience here. They also add some pieces from the portal. This is a very good DB unit, very underrated, one of the better ones in the SEC that people are not talking about.
This defense ranked top 60 in all the major categories last year. They returned 8 starters now. Again, they do lose those top 2 pass rushers, but the improvement the run defense saw, and now this being the second year under Blake Baker with all this production and experience, I'm very excited for this defense. I think it's going to be a top 10, top 15 unit in college football, Nick. Those expectations a little too high because getting this defensive coordinator back for his second year now with all these guys, that just is screaming for immense improvement, and it's almost probably going to be on an elite level if they can certainly play up to these expectations I'm giving them. What are your thoughts on what I think is an A- unit?
I certainly think it's defense in the country. This is a very talented unit. That 25.2 points per game number is certainly going to drop. I think this defense is fantastic. They're going to get that number lower. Their run defense was great. Like I said, I could see them around that number again in the 125 range. The pass, they got to work on it, but they return all the pieces in the secondary, and they can certainly find an improvement there. This is a very good unit. A- is a fair grade for me here. There's so much talent and great leadership here. 8 starters returning, good numbers to have. This is a very good unit in the SEC, very underrated defense.
And the points per game number was a little higher than it should have been. They weren't that great in the red zone. I think they're like 95th or something in that area. And they also need to be better against these tougher opponents. Tennessee walked all over them, 724 yards in Neyland, and then Georgia had almost 500 yards on 80 plays in a game that was close. None of that was inflated. Georgia was still fighting hard till the very final whistle in that one. So that's the biggest concern, Nick. But when you look at the other games, they held up very well against teams like Arkansas, Kentucky, South Carolina. They completely stonewalled them for 203 yards. And then Auburn, that terrible offense, could not generate anything, like 3.3 yards per play in that one. And then the Kansas State game got a little out of hand, too, and the offense didn't really step up in that one. So outside of Georgia and Tennessee, Nick, this defense played great all year long. What are your thoughts on when it comes to playing these tougher opponents? Because that's certainly going to be something here in a second when we talk about the schedule. They're going to see plenty of that.
It's a big issue when you have to travel to places like at Georgia, at Arkansas. Those are tough road trips. They have to find a way to get the defense working. And I think this defense has potential to have better games against teams like Georgia and Arkansas this year. I think there is room for improvement here with this defense. They can certainly find a way to have better days. Overall, I like this defense a lot. I think that they got to be better in the red zone, right? Be able to finish drives off and force teams to kick field goals. That's certainly something they're going to strive for this year. I think Eli Drinkwitz knows that he's got to get that out of his defensive unit. But I think this is a good team defensively on paper that's going to have good production.
Looking at the schedule preview and prediction, the offense has some solid options in supporting cast, but Brady Cook will need to take another step in terms of playmaking through the air. The offensive line figures to make some big strides, just as they did in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball this past year. Defense will be considered one of the nation's top 10 to 15 units, as despite some losses up front, they still have great players in production in the middle and in the secondary. Big sleeper team in the East, a really tough schedule, though I think this team can really win 8 to 9 games with ease, but it's going to be hard, Nick. I wish I could have picked more than 7-5, but you host Kansas State. That's not going to be an easy game against the defending Big 12 champions. LSU won the East last year at Kentucky. The Wildcats certainly have things going for them now on the offensive side of the ball. Some new additions. Defense is really tough. At Georgia, you host Tennessee. You play at Arkansas as a traditional Black Friday game to end the regular season. 75 for me. This is just a really tough schedule overall, Nick. Even the games at home against Florida and South Carolina are going to be tough outs. 7-5. I hate to do it. I'd love to see them win 9 games. I think they certainly can. I just don't know who they're going to beat.
All right, it's tough certainly when you have this scheduling 7-5. They're anywhere from 6-6 to 8-4. I think at this point, this is a tough schedule. Certainly, this is a good team on paper. I love the offense. I like the defense a lot. It's a very talented defense. I think this is a fun schedule too. Hosting Kansas State, very interesting. Playing Memphis, a neutral site game in the Edward Jones Dome in St. Louis. Kind of exciting to see that stadium being used, former home of the St. Louis Rams. Obviously at Arkansas, at Kentucky, at Georgia. All tough road games, certainly at Arkansas. A nice rivalry matchup at home to Florida, South Carolina. Those are tough games. They could certainly lose. Those games go either way. Home to Tennessee, home to LSU. Tough draw against LSU out of the West, certainly. This is a good team, and it's a tough schedule, and I hate to say that they're going to barely scrape bowl eligibility, but that's kind of what's going on here. People are saying Eli Drinkwitz on the hot seat. I disagree with that. I think he's building a culture and building a program in Columbia, Missouri. It's working, in my opinion, with the recruits he's bringing in, but considering how just deep and talented the SEC is, you got to give a coach like Drinkwitz time to build a program, build a culture. I think he's slowly starting to get to do that. I think Missouri fans want to see more results now, but I think, not this season, but next year or the year after, they could certainly find themselves improving more and more overall. This is a good unit heading in the right direction.
Those home games against LSU and Tennessee could certainly be very interesting, though, especially if there's some night games there in Columbia. Very fun team to watch this year. If they can improve on offense, I think they really will have something cooking under Brady Cook. That's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me discussing the Tigers.
Absolutely excited to see what this team can do under Eli Drinkwitz in his 4th season.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.